There is a certain kind of person the world cannot get its hands on. Not because they are strong in the way strength is usually measured, not because they are rich or armed or protected, but because somewhere along the way, they stopped needing anything from anyone who wasn't willing to give it freely. And that, more than money, more than status, more than fear, is the one thing power has never been able to purchase. To understand why, we first have to understand how control actually works. Because most people misunderstand it completely. Control is not force. Force is loud, and force is temporary. It only works for as long as it is being applied. The moment the hand lifts, the grip is gone. Real control has never worked through force. It works through leverage. And leverage requires exactly one thing: a want. Every system of influence in human history has operated on the same law. Find what a person wants, and you own the string attached to it. Approval, money, belonging, comfort, being needed, being seen, being loved by people who may not even deserve to love them. Give someone enough of what they want, and they will bend without ever noticing they've bent. Take it away, and watch how quickly they fold to get it back. This is not a flaw in human psychology. It is the operating system. Wanting is a door, and a door, by definition, can be walked through. This is why the philosopher Epictetus, a man born into slavery in the 1st century, arrived at one of the most dangerous ideas in the history of thought. He said that we suffer not from the events of our lives, but from our judgment about them, and that some things are within our control, and some things are not, and the whole of human misery comes from confusing the two. Epictetus owned nothing. He was beaten. He walked with a permanent limp because of it, and yet history remembers him as one of the freest men who ever lived, because he understood something his masters never could. You cannot own a man's body and call it control if his mind was never for sale. Every so often, a person closes that door entirely, not from anger, not from rebellion, from something quieter and far more permanent: indifference to the outcome. They stop needing the approval. They stop needing to be understood by people who are never going to understand them. They stop needing the story to end a certain way. And the moment that happens, every lever ever built to move them simply stops working. You cannot threaten someone who has already made peace with loss. You cannot flatter someone who does not need to be told who they are. You cannot bribe someone who has already decided what they will not sell. This is the first law of the uncontrollable mind. Control requires a hook, and a person with nothing left to lose has no hook left to offer you. Consider Nelson Mandela. 27 years in prison, much of it in a cell barely large enough to lie down in. The system that held him had every conventional tool of control at its disposal: force, isolation, deprivation, humiliation. And every tool failed, because Mandela had already made an internal decision that no cell could reach. He later said that he never lost the ability to control his own mind, even when his body was entirely controlled by others. That is the split most people never learn to make. Your circumstances can be seized. Your body can be confined. But the part of you that decides what things mean is, and has always been, the one territory no one else can occupy without your permission. This brings us to the second law. Detachment is not the absence of feeling. It is the refusal to let feeling be used as a weapon against you. The ancient Stoics called this apatheia, freedom from being driven by disturbance. Not numbness, not indifference to life, but a kind of internal sovereignty where your emotional reactions are no longer available for someone else to pull. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire at war, wrote to himself in the quiet hours that no one can hurt you unless you allow your own reaction to do the hurting. An emperor, who could have anyone in the world eliminated with a single word, spent his private hours training himself not to be moved by insults from men who could do him no real harm at all. If the most powerful man in the ancient world still had to practice this, understand that it was never about power. It was about architecture, the architecture of a mind that refuses to hand out the keys. Now here is where most explanations of this trait stop, and where they are almost always incomplete. Because this kind of person is not born. They are built, usually by something that tried to break them and failed. A loss they were never supposed to survive. A betrayal that taught them not to hand out trust like currency to anyone who simply asked for it. A version of themselves they had to bury in order to keep functioning at all. Frederick Douglass, born enslaved, later wrote about the exact moment he stopped being controllable. Not the moment he escaped, but years earlier. The moment he physically fought back against a man who had spent years breaking him. He said that moment revived in him a sense of his own manhood, and that from then on, he was a changed man. He said he was a slave in form, but the soul of it had already left him. Notice what actually happened there. His body was still enslaved. Nothing about his legal circumstances changed that day, but something inside the mechanism of control itself broke, because the one thing control depends on, his belief that resistance was pointless, was gone. This is the third law. The moment a person stops believing they need to be saved, they become nearly impossible to hold. It should be said plainly because most versions of this idea leave it out entirely. This is not a superpower. It is a scar with excellent posture. People who cannot be controlled are often also the hardest people to reach. The same wall that keeps out the hand trying to use you keeps out the hand that only wants to hold you. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps and later wrote about the psychology of survival, observed something unsettling. The prisoners who endured were not always the physically strongest. They were the ones who had found something the guards could not touch, an inner meaning that made the suffering bearable. But he also wrote, with total honesty, that many of them emerged from that freedom, unable to feel joy the way they once had. The same detachment that kept them alive also numbed them to the lighter parts of being human. This is the quiet trade nobody warns you about. Freedom from being controlled is real, but it is rarely free. It is paid for, slowly, in the coin of connection. So the next time you meet someone who will not bend, who is not moved by flattery, who does not flinch at threats, who does not chase your approval, no matter how badly you withhold it, understand exactly what you are looking at. It is not arrogance. It is not coldness for its own sake. It is a person who has already paid a price most people will never be asked to pay, and who has no remaining interest in being owned by anyone again. Control was never really about chains or money or threats. It was always about finding the one thing a person could not live without and holding it just out of reach. Some people simply decided at some cost to stop needing anything held. And that decision, once made, cannot be undone by any hand but their own.